Let's give another round of applause for the fine folks that made us lunch today. It was amazing. I hope you all took some time over our lunch break to network and connect with others in the room. And I want to welcome all of our friends joining us online. Can we give them a warm welcome? We are tuning in from Aris, Ontario today, and I don't know what it looks like outside your window today, but it's very snowy here. But I hope everyone is staying warm and safe and is having a great day. We are streaming across the country and maybe even the world. And I asked the question in our chat box online where people are tuning in from. And we have people from Saskatchewan, we have people from Newfoundland, we even have somebody from Missouri joining us today. So again, let's say hello to everybody. I just want to do a couple housekeeping notes for those of us who are online today. There is a chat on the side of your screen, so make sure you are staying connected and chatting on there. There is a Q&A box that you're able to ask questions for the speakers that we will be able to ask them for you. And beside that, there is a blue support button on the bottom of your screen. If you are having technical difficulties, put them in there and somebody will be happy to help you. So this morning, this amazing group of young farmers, we got to have great, important discussions about creating a business plan and it being a pathway for your operation to be more profitable. For those of you online, we will have somebody put a link in the chat to a helpful tool that you'll be able to use to start your business planning. And for everyone who is registered for the event, including the fine folks in this room, you will get a link to that as well. So, the next step in the path of knowing your farm health is your financials. And by reviewing and assessing 3 key financial statements, you are creating net worth, and that will determine how your business grows. Mark Verway is a partner at BDO and has 35 years of experience as a chartered professional accountant with expertise and experience in agriculture. He is also a certified financial planner, a registered financial planner, and his services include real estate succession planning and tax planning. Please help me welcome Mark to the stage.
Thank you. It's good to be here. Again, my name is Mark Verway. I'm the National Industry Leader for Agriculture with BDO Canada. Our vision at BDO is simple. We want to play an integral role in the success of our clients, our agricultural clients, and we are not successful unless our clients are successful. So that's kind of our vision. I look out to this audience today, and I'm fairly confident that I am the oldest person here. I see. So I really hope that you respect your elders. Okay. So, and that it'll go better that way. But the youth that I see here, I appreciate that you represent the future of agriculture, and that's an important stewardship to have. And there's going to be lots of challenges. There's going to be lots of opportunities in agriculture, and that's what you'll be responsible for. So my job is really to give you some concepts from a financial point of view to help you with navigating through the uncertain times that are coming in the future. I was at a seminar a few years back, and the person at the podium, he asked a question to the audience. Okay, and he was at a similar wooden podium to what I'm standing behind right now. And he said, I have a question for you. Take a look at this podium. Can you tell me if it's in a state of growth, a state of stability, or a state of decay? And I, like everybody in the room, raised my hand that this podium was in a state of stability. And he looked out to us and he said, you were all wrong. This podium is in a state of decay. He said the minute the tree was cut to make this podium, it entered the stage of decay. And what his message was, it's dangerous to feel that you're in a state of stability when in fact you could be in a state of decay. So you've got to always remember that, at which state you're in. You think of a person who has a heart attack. It's a very traumatic event. But there were many, many events before that that led to that event. It could be exercise, diet, stress, all those things that led to that one event. So he said, never assume stability. Always assume decay or growth, and make sure you're on the growth side. So my goal today is to help you on that path to growth, to ensure you're going in the right direction. So what you can see there is there's lots of impediments to growth that you're going to be facing as you navigate into the future. There's rising input costs. We're seeing that with fertilizer, chemical feed. There's fluctuating marketing prices. It's hard to have a marketing plan when the prices are changing so much. There's supply chain challenges. I have clients that are worried. They might have 3 combines and they're worried that if one goes down, they're in trouble. So sometimes they have an extra combine if they can. There's weather variability. I think they call it now climate whiplash, where it's the severity of the weather now that impacts your farm. And there's also rising land prices. And some people might say, well, rising land prices, that's an indication of growth. But I would really question that thought process. And for a couple of reasons. If you want to grow your farm, it's hard to expand with prices as high as they are. And I come from Manitoba, and prices in Manitoba, 5,000 to 10,000. I'm flabbergasted by the prices here. So it's hard to grow a land base. And a lot of times the land base that you have is going to go from one generation to the next. So the generation that's farming the land right now is not going to benefit from the increase in prices. And finally, I think I knew a producer who had to sell some of his land to meet his current input costs to survive the next production cycle. So even though his land prices were going up, there was no way he was in a growth mode. So it's important with these impediments to truly strive to grow your farm. Okay. So my objectives for today, I want to help you determine your state. Are you in growth or decay? Okay, to assess that and to ensure you are maximizing your growth potential. So how do we become more successful as farmers? Okay. So a couple ground rules. You were given a handout. You should all have that at your table there. If you flip over the first page, there's a place where you can write down, consider that your to-do list. If I say something here that's somewhat intelligent, please write it down there, okay? And consider that your action plan. And what we'll do later is we'll go through that process and see how do you prioritize some of the ideas that your action plans that you're considering. Okay, so now I'm going to get on my accounting soapbox here, okay, in dealing with numbers. And what I want to say is that one of the best ways to determine your state of growth or decay is through your financial information, okay? That's important to realize that we are going to talk about numbers in the next little while, but there is a definite relevance to your numbers and how you can use them to grow. Okay? So let's talk about the importance of numbers, okay? First of all, numbers don't lie, okay? If you go to a hockey game and you see a score of 3-2, it's 3-2. There's no subjectivity to that. The numbers represent reality. I have never had a closing conference with one of my clients where the numbers said one thing and the farming operation said the other. There's always a correlation. In a bad year, the numbers are bad. A good year, the numbers are good. So there's always a correlation between the numbers and the reality of the farming operation for that particular year. Numbers are also verifiable. Okay, you can check if a number is right. If you look to your balance sheet and you see inventory and it doesn't look reasonable, you can go back and you can check it to make sure it is right, to give you that peace of mind. There's also comparability to numbers. You can compare your numbers, because to measure growth, you're going to want to measure the numbers over a period of time. It allows you that comparability. Okay, you can do benchmarking with your numbers, so that's important. And every decision you're going to make on your farm will have a financial consequence. You can't get away from that. So that's the importance of the numbers. The numbers will tell you. The numbers are your report card, and they're going to assess how well you made your decisions as you progress through the life of the farm. Now, some prerequisites for the information that you're going to look at, there's 3 of them. Okay? The first thing is the information that you're using to make your decisions, the financial information, it has to be timely. You've got to get that information to you as quick as you can to make your decisions. If you have a year end of December 31st, you want to look at those numbers recently after that, within the next 3 months, to make sure you got an assessment of how you did for that year. The numbers have to be accurate. In order to make sound decisions, you want to make sure that your numbers are accurate, okay? Because bad information in really means bad decisions are being made. And you want your numbers to be prepared on the accrual basis. That's incredibly important. So, because what the accrual basis does, it brings the whole picture into play. And I'll elaborate on what accrual basis looks like going forward, but it matches your effort, which are your expenses, to the results, which are your revenue. And that's how you make key decisions going forward. And I know a lot of you here are not incorporated. If you're incorporated, you're pretty well mandated to prepare accrual statements. If you're not incorporated, I would still highly encourage you to prepare accrual statements. If you want to get on the good side of your financial institution, prepare accrual statements and take them to them. And then they can see them to help you with your financing. So I really stress working off the accrual basis. So now we're going to talk about what are the 2 key pieces of information that you should digest, to assess the success of your farm and to make sure that you're in a growth mode. And they're twofold. There's your statement of operations and your balance sheet. You need to have a grasp of those 2 statements. They each have a specific purpose that will help guide your operations. The first one we'll talk about is your balance sheet. Okay? With your balance sheet, and I'll give you an example on the next page. With your balance sheet, you want to prepare it on what they call a book value basis. Okay, and the best example of that is if you buy land. Okay, you want to keep your land recorded at cost in each year that you report. I would not put it at appreciated value. Keep it at cost. Your productive equipment, it would be cost less depreciation, which is wear and tear, because again, that's reality. Okay, so that's important, is to record at cost. And also, you want to separate the activities from current and long term within your farming operation. That's important as well. So, this is the first part of a balance sheet. Okay, so this is the good side of the information of the equation, because these are the assets that you own, okay? Again, this is on the accrual basis. This is the complete picture of the farm. Okay, and that's on the back side of page 2 of your handout. Okay, so again, you see it's broken out into 2 specific categories. You've got your current assets at the top. Your current assets they're either in a cash state or they can be convertible into cash within the next year. Okay, that's important. Then you have below that your productive assets, your property, plant, and equipment, and your land. Much more long term, they create your capacity for your farming operation. Okay, so that's your balance sheet. That's the asset side of your balance sheet. We go to the next page. This is the second component of your balance sheet. These are the liabilities and the shareholders' equity. Okay, so all of a sudden we're getting into the so-called negative side of your balance sheet, because we're looking at what money is owed by your farming operation. Again, you look at the top of that page, you've got a current portion. Okay, those are obligations that must be extinguished within the next year. Okay, so you'll want to know that going into your next production cycle. Okay, ones on that are key would be your input payables for your input supplies. Current portion of long-term debt is on here because everybody usually has debt. How much of that has to be paid in the next year? That's current. And then you look below that, then you've got your non-current, you've got your long-term debt. That is what you use to finance your productive assets. You have mortgages, equipment loans, there and there. And you might have amount due to shareholders, where shareholders have injected money into the corporation or into your entity to help out. After that, what you have left is what they call your shareholders' equity. Okay, and this is the important number, because this is what's left. This is how you value your farm, how you assess growth is with this number. Because on the previous page, you had assets of around 4.5 million. We had liabilities up there of 3.3. So what's left is about 1.2 million in equity. That's your value. Okay, again, this is on the accrual basis because it's taken at a point in time, say December 31st. But that's important to know that. Okay. Now we go to the statement of operations. Okay. Yes.
The land value. What if you bought it for 1/10 of the current value?
Yep.
Where would you put the valuation?
I'll explain that later. Okay. But that's a good question. Yeah. You're not going to dismiss that for sure. Okay.
You might have got it from the Queen.
Well, I have land in Manitoba that we have on the books for $100 an acre because it's generational, transferred forward. But for the purpose of what I'm delivering here, I want to help you make key decisions. And land values shouldn't be part of the key decision, the increase in it. And I'll explain that, but it's a good point. So now we'll look at your statement of operations. Okay? That is a flow document. That measures your activity from one year to the next. Okay? This is the work. All the decisions you made are borne by this statement. Okay? And again, this statement is reported on the accrual basis, where it measures your effort, the expenses incurred to put in a crop, to grow your livestock, matched against the revenue from the livestock or the crop revenue. Okay? And this is where reporting on a cash basis doesn't make sense. It should be on the accrual basis. I know a producer, at the end of the year, felt he was in a pretty good spot because his cash balance was pretty big. It was sizable enough. But what he didn't realize is he had depleted his inventory. He didn't have any inventory. He had collected all his deferreds. So that was the only real asset that he had was cash. So he, in effect, didn't have enough funds to finance next year's crop. So do not rely solely on cash to determine whether you're successful or not. So here's an example of a statement of operations. And I come from Manitoba. We do a lot of crop, okay? Yeah. So this is the example, but you could put livestock in here as well. But you can see the progression of this. You've got the crop revenue at the top, and that crop revenue is the actual crop produced that year. You should be able to take your acres times your yield times your price to come to that value. Okay, it's not what you sold and you have in the bank, it's what you produced that year. Below that is your cost of goods sold. For crop, that includes fertilizer, chemical, seed. For livestock, that would include livestock purchases, feed would be in that one. Okay, that brings you down to a gross margin. Okay, that's an important number. Then below that, you have your direct operating expenses. Indirect, and they're associated with the farming operation. They would include labor, they would include repairs and maintenance. And then you come down to your contribution margin. Okay, so that's an important number. Then you have overhead expenses, which are more fixed in nature, like your professional fees, your dues. They don't change much. Coming down to operating income. Now, the key thing of operating income is you should be able to compare farms in the same subsector at this point, for how successful you are, if you're going to do any benchmarking. Where it gets different is when you go below this to the capital-related costs. Okay, the capital-related costs, they will depend on the leverage of your farm. That would include interest on long-term debt. That would include amortization, wear and tear in your equipment. That could include leasing expenses. So that's a different category. There you come, income before other income of $72,000. Then you have other income and expenses. This is income of $65,000. This is more I would call one-off expense or one-off income. You might have your agri-invest income in there. You might have a gain on sale of some equipment in there. So that's, we put that towards the bottom. Then you have your income before income taxes, $137,000. Some income tax against that coming to your net income of $137,340. So please remember that number, because that number is going to become relevant as we progress here. So that is the balance sheet and the income statement. I'm not going to talk about the statement of cash flow today. Just within time constraints, I'm going to concentrate on these two documents. And what I want to show you now is what is the relationship between those two documents. You know, I've told you that those two documents are incredibly important to the success of your farm. Well, how do they work together so that you know the interrelationship between the two? So the next page I'm going to show you is probably the most important page of this entire presentation. If you take one thing away from this, it's the next page that I'm going to present to you, because it's going to be the relationship between the two. Okay, I call this, for all intents and purposes, the owner's equity accumulation. This is going to measure your growth. And I think this is on the front page of page 2, the front page. So again, if you take anything away, take this document away. So we're going to start at the top. The top part is the balance sheet. That kind of tells you where we are at. Okay? So on the left-hand side of the top, that was your balance sheet at the beginning of the year. Okay, that was your starting point, again, on a book value basis. Then we stay at the top and we go to the right, that's your balance sheet at the end of the year. Okay, so that's your net worth on a book value basis at the end of the year. Okay, so you can see it's $1,194,000 is the owner's equity value. Okay, the number in the middle there, that $137,000, that was the growth in your farm for that period of time, for that year. So you now know how you grew that year. Okay, you can stop there and say, well, maybe I was lucky, maybe I was good. But if you want to know how you grew that, you have to look below that number to your statement of operations. So you've looked at your statement of operations, and we've reviewed these numbers. We start with crop revenue, we work all the way down to net income of $137,000. That's what attributed to your growth. Okay, was that number there? So it's obvious, profitability drives the success of your farm. And that $137,000 is the most important number. That represents the decisions you made to improve your farming operation. And this is where I like showing the land at cost. You go to the top part there, the top far corner of the number, that $4,507,000, that is at cost. That is not at fair market value. That is at cost, which means the numbers below represent effort. If that 4.5 we had put, say we put it at fair market value, all of a sudden below here we'd have a figure called appreciation of land or appreciation of an asset. No reflection of your activity, no reflection of your effort, just the fact that the land went up. So I like it on a cost basis because this measures the decisions you made in that farm. Okay? That's what's going to drive success. If you think success is increasing farm prices, quota prices, it's a slippery slope. Unless you're prepared to sell the farm, you can't rely on appreciated value. Again, it could be generational. There are other factors in play. So I like going on a cost basis just to allow you to measure your effort. And you know, we talked about mental health was discussed here. How do I get peace of mind that I'm doing all right? That 137 or 13% increase should give you peace of mind over a period of time, that you're making the right decisions. You know, you might incur more debt, but you have more assets. The net of that, is there growth with the net of that? That's important. A lot of you have investments, and you'll get a quarterly investment statement. I have clients who get investment statements quarterly. And it doesn't matter whether it's a 5-page investment statement or a 25-page investment statement. They're only looking at 2 numbers. The only 2 numbers they're looking at is, did my investments go up in value over that quarter, and what was the percentage? And that's what the 137,000 or the 13% is. That's the only numbers that they're worried about that would give you peace of mind. If I was doing a closing conference with a producer, and he came into me and he said, okay, you have 2 minutes. I've got to get back on the field. I would show him this statement, and that would give him an indication of whether he's growing or not. And then we can go beyond there at a different time. But this is the one page that will summarize how you've done for the year. This is the one page that will summarize your decision-making process. So I think this is critical to your farming operation. Okay, time to get a little personal. I'm going to tell you a bit more about myself. I have had Lyme disease. I don't think there was any neurological damage, but you can decide that. I have had atrial fibrillation, which has required 2 heart procedures, and I'm a candidate for a knee replacement. So my wife tells me I'm quite the catch. So, but what that has forced me to do, that has forced me to really look at my health. Okay, and stay with me here. Okay, really will look at my health and what you need to do to be healthy. And I really found out in all the research that I did that there's 3 things that you need to do to be healthy. 3 things you have to work on: flexibility, cardio, and strength. If you can master those or concentrate on those things, it will help your health. Okay. You know, when I think of flexibility, flexibility helps with your stability. The older you get, the more stable you should be. Your cardio is your heart. That's your engine. You want to make sure your engine's working properly. And your strength is your bones, your muscles, your cartilage, your ligaments. They're all benefit from that. It's funny, Health Canada says in 1 week you should put in 150 minutes of exercise. I know a lot of producers who do that before their first coffee break on a Monday morning. You know, with all the activity, what they're doing, especially on the cattle side, you know, livestock, there's lots to do. So I commend producers, I admire producers for their exercise. I see many 80-year-old people in combines, okay, maintaining that health because they've been active all their life, okay. So what I realize is you can apply these same principles to your farming operation, these 3 pillars. And you have to be healthy to grow your farm, okay? And that's important. And I think if you look at these 3 pillars, you can look at your health of your farm to make sure you have the potential for growth. And what this boils down to is, it boils down to your 3 key ratios in your farm to assess your health. Okay, it's your working capital ratio, your debt to equity ratio, and your debt service ratio, and your debt to equity ratio. Okay. And FCC will assess these each year for you. Okay, it will be part of your annual meeting. They are looking at these ratios to assess the health of your farm because they recognize how important it is. And each ratio has a specific purpose. And each ratio will have a threshold that your lender will want to see you exceed. Again, that's kind of your health line. That's important. Okay, and the thresholds that are picked can vary between subsectors. Okay, so make sure that the threshold is specific to your subsector. So the first one we're going to talk about flexibility. The first pillar, flexibility. That is your working capital ratio. Okay? It's balance sheet focused, but it's important for your flexibility. Okay? I have a client every year after our closing conference. He'll say, "Am I able to farm next year?" And he says it jokingly, and I said, "Yeah, you can farm next year." But this ratio would be a tipping point if a producer could not farm next year. Okay, because in essence, what your working capital ratio assesses is, do you have the funds available today to finance next year's production? So there is an immediacy to this ratio. Okay. So I'm going to simply show you how it's calculated. Okay. It's simply your current assets, which we talked about, your current assets. It's either cash or going to be converted into cash type assets within the next year, over your current liabilities. Okay, what are your obligations for the next year? Okay, are you able to meet those obligations? And generally, in some subsectors, the financial institution would like to see a ratio of 1.25, which means you want $1.25 of current assets to cover $1 worth of obligations going into the next production cycle. It's really important to stay ahead of this ratio. You should know going into the next production cycle that you have the funds to continue on with that cycle. Why does this represent flexibility? You have a lot more control with a higher working capital ratio. If you want to hang on to your commodities or not sell livestock, not being forced to meet obligations, a working capital ratio will help you with that. If you need to buy inputs at the end of the year for tax purposes, you need the cash to do that. Okay? And even if you want to buy some capital assets to avoid them being financed, if you have working capital, you have excess cash in your working capital, you can do that as well. So that gives you the flexibility in the farming operation. Now, the next one we're going to talk about is your cardio. Your cardio is your debt service ratio. That is a statement of operations focused. Okay? How many here know what their debt service ratio was their last cycle? Okay. Not many do. Yet I would argue, and I'm sure the financial institutions would back me, this is the most important ratio for you to understand. So if you want to put something down on that to-do list, get an appreciation of your debt service ratio. It is so critical to the success of your farm. Because really what it is measuring is, do you have the ability to service the existing debt that you have? Okay? And that's critical. Okay? Okay. So, we'll just show you the calculation now. So this is probably maybe the more complicated of the three calculations, your debt service ratio. Okay, so you can see that it takes your earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation divided by your interest and the current portion of your long-term debt. So in layman terms, what that is, it looks at your cash profitability before covering your debt servicing, what cash is available, and then it divides that by what is your debt service requirements, would be the interest on your long-term debt and your debt and your principal payments. That's a critical ratio. Okay. Now, sometimes it's calculated differently with different financial institutions. Sometimes it's calculated differently with different subsectors. I know dairy would have a different threshold than crop. Okay, but if you look at the graph here, you can see in the final year that's 0.92. There's a challenge here. Okay, they do not have enough current funds or current profitability based on the prior years to meet their debt servicing requirements. So they're going to have to make some changes. Okay? And when we talk about growth, if you have a debt service ratio that's well above the line, you can go out and command more debt. That means if you want to grow your farming operation, buying more assets, you need to have a good debt service ratio. If you have a challenging debt service ratio, it's going to be tough to grow. Because you haven't necessarily proven that you can service your existing debt. What are you going to do differently to create your profit for any new debt? And again, this is really driven by profitability of your farming operation. Okay, so try and get a command of your debt service ratio. The final ratio we're going to talk about is your debt to equity ratio. Again, that's balance sheet focused. Okay. What it does, it compares your total external debt to what you have in the game in terms of your equity in the farming operation. Okay? And again, this is normally on a book value basis when you calculate this. A lot of financial institutions like to see a 1-to-1 ratio where you've got $1 worth of external debt, you've got $1 worth of equity in your farming operation. So, but again, the thresholds could change. You think of it much like if you're going to go buy a house, and you buy that house, and 75% of it is mortgage, 25% is equity, that you're putting in. As you pay down that house, as you pay down the principal payments, your equity is going to increase in the farming, or in owning that house. Same principle with your farming operation. As you pay down the debt, your equity should increase. And I'll give you the example of that. So you can see here in the calculation, again, it's the debt, external debt divided by your equity. This is the one threshold where you want the line to be below the threshold, which means you have more equity than debt. It becomes fractional. Okay, so that's important to know this ratio. Okay. Now, what producers will sometimes, or I should say what financial institutions will sometimes do, is if you're being challenged by this, as we're reporting on the book value basis, this is when they'll bring in the fair market value. Okay, because that does represent reality. You know, I often call this the worst case scenario because, you know, if you're not satisfying this one, even on a fair market value basis, your farm is probably in the decay mode. And this is the one where you want to see it growing. Okay, so this is more longer term. This is assessing the strength of your farm. Okay, the debt to service ratio. Okay. So at this point, we've got you out of the doctor's office. We've got you, you've just visited your accountant, you've just visited your financial institution, and they have given you an idea of what state you're in, whether you're in the state of decay or growth. Now you've got to make decisions to how do I continue on the path to growth? Because there's no growth without making decisions. You have got to make decisions, okay, to grow. The worst decision, as I said before, is no decision. You've got to take a stand, and you've got to look at ways to grow your practice or to grow your farm. When you Google how many decisions a person makes in a day, it'll tell you 35,000. A person makes 35,000 decisions a day. A lot of them subconscious, but there's lots of decisions to be made. So you're going to be making decisions all the time. So what you want to do is how do I make the most appropriate decisions for my farm? Because you have limited resources. You have limited time. What's the process to make the right decisions? So what I'm suggesting is you need to ask yourself two critical questions when making a decision. Okay, when you decide at the beginning of the year, here's the things that I want to enact for our farm this year to put it forward, and you've got a to-do list of what you want to do, how do I know which one I should do first? How should I prioritize that process? And that will give you peace of mind, knowing that you have a set plan for making decisions. Okay? Sometimes you can be inundated with choices, and that can be overwhelming. But if you have a process to make those decisions, that will help you. Okay? So the first question I would suggest you ask yourself, when you're contemplating various decisions or strategies for your farm, the first question is, what is the impact of this decision? What will be the impact of this decision if it succeeds? And there's various ways you can look at it. Mostly it's profitability. Will this make my farming operation more profitable? Ask yourself that, okay? It could be lifestyle. There could be a lifestyle choice here, okay? I had one client who bought a grain dryer because he wanted to harvest earlier in the morning so he could spend more time with his family in the evening. So it wasn't profitability, it was lifestyle and family, okay? So there are various kinds of impact, but most cases it's profitability. I love when I hear a client, he said, you know, I bought this asset and the payback period is 10 years. So he knows in 10 years he's going to start making money with this investment. Okay, so he's gone through the process of impact and how it will benefit the farm. It might not be next year, but it eventually will come to fruition that he will make a profit. The second question you're going to ask yourself is, how easy will it be for this decision to be implemented? Okay, that's the second thing you have to ask yourself. Okay? And what you're looking at there is, how much time is it going to take to implement this decision? What are the resources needed to implement this decision? You know, a lot of time that's money, what funds are required. And do I have the motivation to make this decision? Okay? You may understand that there's a lot of profitability in swine, but you're just not motivated to go there. So you wouldn't choose that route. Okay? So you got to be motivated. And what I'm saying on this one is, the previous one I had a rating of 1 to 10 in terms of what you determine the impact. This one I'm saying give it a rating between 1 and 5. The reason I've done that is I've given more weighting to the impact side of things, because some decisions are going to be hard. You know, you got to look at the impact first. If it's going to have a good impact, there may be some difficulty with implementing, but I think the impact is more important. But you still need to consider both of them. So I'm just going to go through an example with you of what it would look like. So here's a simple example of what you would do for, say, the beginning of the year. You know, you want to decide what route you should take that year. Okay? So we've got acquire more land, say 100 acres. We got build a new machine shed, do some land tiling, purchase a grain dryer, or lo and behold, calculate your accumulated owner's equity. Okay? So those are the decisions you're contemplating. The first one is, the first column there, what's the impact of each decision? Okay, how will that impact, let's say, the profitability of my operation? And I've rated those between 1 and 10. The middle column is, I've assessed what's the ease of implementation of each one of those. And you can see at the top, acquiring more land. That's going to be difficult, because if you don't have neighbors that want to sell land, and with the price and the rising interest costs, that becomes difficult. At the bottom of that column, I got calculating accumulated owner's equity. That's pretty easy to implement. Okay, so I gave that more of a rating. And then the final column is your ranking of your decisions. You can look at there and you can prioritize what decisions you should make first. Okay, and that will help you with the process. I have fudged these numbers a bit to sway you towards your owner's accumulated equity, but you're going to have your own reasons for what you pick. So I guess some keys to making your decisions. Okay. Involve your key stakeholders when you make those decisions. Bring in your family members who should be part of the decision-making process. And appreciate the biggest impact on profit. Look for the biggest impact, which is profitability. Okay, that will drive the success of your farm. Will be, how do you drive up the profitability of your operation? Now we talk about, how do I impact profitability? Okay. I like the process of starting at the top. Okay, what ways, what decisions, what actions can I take to improve revenue? What actions can I take to improve cost of production? What actions can I take to improve my direct operating expenses? So, to clarify, I'm not an agronomist. I'm not a heavy-duty mechanic. I'm not a marketing specialist. You have to find the right people to help you with making those decisions, or make them yourself. My job is to create accountability with the numbers, to say, here's the decisions you made. The numbers will show you whether it was the right decision or not. And that's important. Okay. So a simple example of that, you know, where do we start? Here is what we call, it's the contribution. It's a statement of contribution, which ties into all the numbers that I've given you. So what you're doing there is you're starting at the top to make decisions. You're starting at the revenue. What small changes can I make to improve the revenue of my farm? Okay? You know, what actions are needed to do that? Then you look at you go down, you look at your cost of goods sold. Okay? What can I do there with fertilizer, chemicals, seed, feed costs? What small things can I do there to improve that? And then you get down to your direct operating expenses, and you ask yourself, what can I do there to make some changes to improve the profitability of my farm? So it's a bunch of small changes to improve your farm. But when you look at the magnitude of those changes, you look at the top there, a 5% increase in your revenue would lead to an increase in income of 49%, or $67,000. You go down to the bottom left, 5% decrease in cost of goods sold, 16% increase in your income, $22,000. The right side, a 5% decrease in direct operating expenses. That would be a 12% increase in your income, or $16,000. So if you had put all those together, just on a 5% basis, your profits would have improved by $105,000. You would be approaching $250,000 in profitability on that same farm. You went from 137 to about 242,000 by making small changes. So you don't have to make a lot of changes. You just got to make, or you just make small ones And that can help. There's a Japanese principle called Kaizen. And the premise behind that is many small changes lead to big results. So that's the importance of making small changes to your operation. Now, how do we create momentum when it comes to making your financial choices? Because you're dealing with numbers. And I know you're not probably totally comfortable with dealing with numbers, and I've stressed the importance of them. So where does one start when dealing with numbers? And I like the concept of hindsight, insight, foresight model to making decisions and to using your financial information. For example, your hindsight, you're dealing with your past. This is where you determine your balance sheet and your statement of operation. This is the starting point, and it's a building block process. But you can't go beyond until you've accomplished this, until you have a strong understanding of these numbers. Okay? Again, balance sheet, statement of operation. And we have talked about both of those today. So get a real good understanding on the accrual basis, because that's the whole picture scenario. Then we go to insight. And with insight, you're looking at the now. So right there, you're looking at your financial ratios. We discussed the ratios. You know, your working capital ratio is going to move you into the next production cycle. That's now. You can start talking about key performance indicators. Once you've got that financial information, you can look at your cost of production per unit, revenue per head, per acre, contribution margin per commodity. You could do benchmarking. All these little things, because I can pretty well guarantee you, as you move forward, your margins are going to get tighter and tighter. Okay, so it's these little things that will help you navigate through times of uncertainty and also taking advantage of opportunities. And finally, once we get to the foresight side of things, you know, there you're creating your own future. Okay, you're forecasting, you're budgeting. You've prepared a business plan that Will had talked about this morning. You're talking succession planning. You're now dealing with the future. Okay, you're creating your future. So that's important to do that. Because if you don't plan, you plan to fail. So make sure you have a plan going forward. How do you ensure that you are growing? Okay, what's the process there? Make sure you prioritize your decisions. We talked about doing the ranking of your decisions. Prioritize them as to which ones are most important. Okay? Document your progress throughout the year. You know, what changes have you made to your farming operation that moved it forward? And at the end of the year, celebrate your successes. Show how you've grown the farm. And you'll really grow the farm in two ways. You'll grow the farm financially. We talked about the net worth, how that's growing. But you're also going to grow it by changing processes, by doing things more important or doing things differently. And it might not create profitability for a couple of years, 3 years, but at least you've done that. That's a success that you've made changes to your farm. Okay, so success is results and processes. Now I really believe, and we heard this morning, people talking, that there is an absolute direct relationship with financial awareness and financial success. I heard a study once, and what they did is they surveyed 100 college students, and they asked these students, are you tracking your net worth as a college student? And only 5% of those students were tracking their net worth, only 5%. So they followed these students right through to employment, career, and retirement. And what they found out was the 5% who were tracking their net worth at the beginning had amassed more net worth than the other 95%. Because they had the financial awareness in the beginning to track their financial affairs. It seems a bit far-fetched. Maybe Bill Gates was one of that 5%, I don't know. But we do see it. There's definitely a relationship between your growth and being financially aware. And to be honest, all that boils down to is this page right here that we talked about. That's the key to your success. Monitor your growth. Celebrate your growth. The growth here, 137,000. What's the growth next year? What's the growth after that? But if you can comprehend this page, there is success. Okay? This sets the stage for your thought process. You're going to start thinking about things to make this work because this is in your mind. Anybody here have aha moments? Okay, where you all of a sudden you think of something out of the blue? In order to do that, you have to have a stage that it's in the back of your mind. Put this in the back of your mind and have your aha moments. Okay? A lot of people say, I have aha moments in the shower. Mine occur at 4 o'clock in the morning for some reason. I don't know why, but I'll have a pad of paper and I'll write things down. Half this presentation was created at 4 in the morning. And so, but you need to create that stage, and that's what this one document will do. So the takeaways from this, starting at the top left, create sound financial reporting. That's looking at your balance sheet and your income statement. That's the start, okay? Going down, assess the health of your farming operation. Look at those 3 key ratios, and are you in a healthy state? We go to the top right-hand side, make decisions. The worst thing, you can't make a decision. So make decisions, use that framework for prioritizing your best decisions, and make them with conviction. And finally, at the bottom there, track your net worth. And that's your owner's equity. That's the previous one we had just looked at. Track that to make sure you're on the right path. There's going to be years where you're not, okay? But most years, if you're planning, you will be on the right path. I have one producer friend, and he says, my job is simple. My job is to feed the world. And that sounds very noble, and there comes with that a lot of responsibility. So I wish you success in that, because you are our future. You are our young farmers. So I wish you the best, and thank you for the time you've taken to listen to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I took so much from that, and the biggest takeaway that I think I took from you, Mark, is not all changes are going to happen overnight and be successful right away, but it takes time for these small changes, and then eventually they do add up, and it can be financial gains or it can be emotional and family gains. So thank you again so much. So something that plays into the mix when you're working with farm financials and future planning is definitely the health of the economy, and recognizing trends affecting your operating environment and knowing how to assess the risks helps you make informed decisions and investments. Justin Shepard is a senior economist from FCC who specializes in monitoring agricultural production and analyzing global supply markets, demands, and trends. He speaks on interest rates, global markets, and the ever-popular farmland values. So please help me welcome Justin to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks very much for being here and taking time out of your day to come hang out with Farm Credit Canada and some of your peers. So I'm lucky enough to be here as a senior economist and also a young farmer. I have a few more years before I'm no longer the young in farmer, but hopefully can carry on farming anyway. So today I'm going to talk about kind of a mix of navigating inflation is the main piece, but it's really everything that goes around it. So inflation is what's been in the news for the last 2 years, but it doesn't necessarily directly impact your farms. What impacts your farms is interest rates, and that's really the key relationship that I'm going to speak on today. So we'll touch on 3 economic themes today, the first one being economic weakness, and that it's going to continue into 2024. So 2023 was really that transition of 2022. We had a really strong economy, everyone was spending money. 2023, cracks started to show up. In 2024, we're going to see continued weakness. So what does that impact for inflation and then borrowing costs? We see them as having likely peaked, and at some point in the near future, we're going to start seeing declines in there, and it's that timing that really matters for producers. So here's probably the most important slide that we talk about, that we look at, and it's that the Bank of Canada overnight rate. So the rate on the bottom is what the Bank of Canada sets their policy rate at. And you can see in 2000, it was basically zero. It was 0.25%. The actual rate that you would receive as a business was somewhere around 2.5%, 3%, depending on what you're using that credit for. So you can see since middle of 2022, so June 2022, the Bank of Canada started to really rapidly increase interest rates. And that's played a huge part in determining the great presentation before me on financial health and profitability for your business, and especially coming back to how you finance your farm, and then especially farmland values. The higher interest rates is definitely starting to play a key part in that. So this is the cost of funds curve. So the bottom line was 2 years ago, November 15th, 2021. You can see that the cost of funds were very low. So whether you were taking on short-term debt or long-term debt, we were really at historical lows for interest rates, which made expanding, purchasing houses, purchasing farmland, equipment, it made sense from a taking on debt perspective. However, in just the 2 years since then, we've seen a really rapid run-up in interest rates. And last year in 2022, you can see that the short-term rates were just under 4%, and then long-term rates around 3%, and then where we're at today. So today we're in an interesting market where the yield curve is actually inverted. So inverted means that the short-term rate is higher than long-term rates. So if you look at this today, you would say long-term money is cheaper. So if instead of taking a variable rate mortgage, maybe you're looking at fixed rates because it's cheaper over the long term. So it's something that only happens every few years. It typically has meant that there will be a recession at some point in the future. The Bank of Canada, and we don't believe that we're going to see a really strong recession. We're going to see some weakness in the economy, but we're not necessarily going to see a really strong recession occur. What has to happen is that yield curve has to uninvert. At some point, short-term money has to be worth less than long-term. And so at that point, that's going to be a key time period for the economy to work its way through. And we're looking at 2025 before this yield curve actually goes back to that historical market where it's in a carry. The reason being, if you think for 2024, the market right now is expecting 75 basis points cut in the overnight rate in 2024. So the market has 50 basis points in for the first half of 2024 and 25 for the last half. As a group of economists, we think that cut is actually going to happen a bit later in the year. So we're looking at the second half of 2024 before we see any interest rate cuts. But we do expect to see that 75 basis point cut at the end of 2024, sometime in the second half. So if we look at this black line and we take off from the 1 month period, you take off 75 points, you're still at 4.25%. It means that it's still higher than the long-term money. So essentially in 2024, we will not see this curve flip and that long-term money will go higher. So that's our rationale for seeing that. In 2024, we are expecting weakness. At some point, the Bank of Canada will have to start to cut rates. However, it's going to be in the second half, and it's still not going to be enough to actually make this yield curve flip back into its traditional carry market. The only thing, and it's a kind of a big caveat, is that if you had a really strong or really hard recession, a really hard recession would force the Bank of Canada to step in and to start cutting rates much more aggressively than what we in the market are expecting. If the Bank of Canada had to cut rates really rapidly to try to jumpstart an economy in trouble, ultimately, then this yield curve would come down and it would change much quicker. So our assumption, and which holds for this, is that there is no strong recession. But if there is a strong recession, then it would be a very different Bank of Canada environment than what we're expecting. So how did we get here? We've had 2 years of rapidly increasing interest rates, quite a change, and really it's a demand exceeding supply story. So the supply story, COVID happened. We had a lot of challenges around the world accessing certain products, from whether it's places like China, where they shut down entire markets, or even within Canada and the United States, where we had problems producing the same amount of goods as we were in a normal time. For the consumer in that time period initially saved money during COVID. They didn't have the ability to go out and spend on experience, for example, like they couldn't travel. But instead what they did was spend money on things, and those things could be housing, it could be vehicles on a farm, it could be farmland value, because we've also seen appreciation in farmland. So essentially we had the consumers spending more money on goods that simply were not there in the economy. They were not produced, and in order to, when you have demand exceeding supply, you have inflation. And that's what we've seen in the last couple of years. The key thing for the Canadian economy is that it's really driven by consumer spending. So in Canada, about 55% of the economy is driven by consumer spending. So if consumers choose not to spend money, if consumers don't have the ability to spend money, that's what really hurts the economy. And then that changes how the Bank of Canada, as well as fiscal policy, has to handle it. So in Canada, we are very much driven on what the consumer does. And then some of the following slides really show why the consumer is really important for inflation. So Canadian inflation, this has been maybe one of the most talked about slides in economic areas for the last year and a half. So you can see the top line is food. Food inflation has been kind of pervasively higher, and it's staying sticky compared to many of the other parts of the economy. So the total line is the dark blue in the middle. You can see that it is, so total inflation, that includes everything in the economy. So we've seen that stay strong as well. We've seen that run up. And then the light blue is called core inflation. And that's what the Bank of Canada actually looks at when they are setting their policy rate. So they're really looking for 2%. Inflation, which they would describe as a healthy, growing economy, but the range is really 1% to 3% in their rate. So they're saying 1 to 3, as long as it's under 3% and on a continued downward trend, then inflation is in a healthy spot, in that their overnight rate, what they set the interest rate at, does not necessarily need to move or go up or go down. You're in a healthy spot. They'll make slight adjustments. But essentially what we've seen is, because we had such strong inflation, the Bank of Canada had to come out, really rapidly increase interest rates. So in a course of a year, it went up nearly 400 basis points, which is a really strong historical increase in interest rates. So it's that the Bank of Canada is trying to balance future inflation by what they set today's interest rate at. The interest rate really takes 6 to 12 months to work its way through to impact inflation. So you can see that last year in June of 2022, we had inflation for core around 4%. That's when the Bank of Canada started to really quickly jack up interest rates. And it's just now, a year later, where that impact is actually being felt by consumers, kind of across the country, and we've also seen it in North America. The United States has had a fairly similar looking market as well. So ultimately, if the Canadian consumer is a large percent of our economy and drives the GDP, what happens when the Canadian consumer does something different than normal? So the chart on the left is their historical savings rate. So prior to COVID, if you earned $100, you spent 97 of it. We do not, as a country, we do not tend to save very much. There's obviously people who save lots, and there's some who save nothing at all. But on average, we spend, call it 97 out of $100 that we earn. What happened at COVID? We had no place to spend that on. We couldn't take trips, we couldn't go places. It took a while for consumers to realize they could order stuff on Amazon, purchase a new house, do a renovation, spend money in different ways than they did traditionally. So the savings rate kind of jumped up, and now it's coming back down to where kind of historical norms are. So even today, we're above prior to COVID. So we're about 5% today. So again, if you earn $100 today, you're spending 95 of that. And because the Canadian consumer really drives the economy, when the Canadian consumer diverges and does something different, it has a really impactful knock-on effect. On the right is debt servicing as a share of disposable income. So this is back to 1990. In the early 1990s, interest rates for a house or for farmland would have been 17, 18%. So 3 times the level we're at today. So a huge difference. But what's the difference today in debt servicing is that the actual asset values are higher. So whether you're talking about a house, whether you're talking about farmland, whatever that asset class is worth so many times more than it was in 1990. And that's why debt servicing as a share of disposable income is up so much. So home affordability, obviously this, again, in the news on the left is home prices. The index is 2005. So since 2005, we kind of had a nice, decent trend over time, like housing appreciated at a set amount every year. But what happened in COVID was initially kind of a flattening and then a really rapid run up in house prices. So COVID again, consumers did not have the ability to spend money in the normal way, or maybe they were working from home, so then they had to invest in their own house. And again, completely changed, jacked up, housing prices went up. Since then, they've come down a little bit, but we don't expect it to actually return to that long-term trend. If we saw it return to that long-term trend, that would mean a pretty significant recession and that housing prices would lose from today about 20% of their value. So if that's the case, that would be a kind of a catastrophic occurrence for consumers to lose that much spending power. So even though when housing prices go up in value, you don't necessarily have more money in your pocket, consumers still spend it as if they do. So every time housing prices go up by $1, a consumer spends about 10 cents of that. So in this case, even though they don't necessarily have more income, they're still spending that money, whether it's through home equity lines of credit. So consumers are finding ways to spend that money. If, again, this housing price came down 20%, it acts the same way in reverse. Every time a house price goes down by $1, that consumer is going to pull 10 cents out of the economy, again, weakening the economy. On the right is the home affordability index. So we aren't actually at 1990 levels when you include at that point what disposable incomes were, like what the average earnings were. So we're not at the same unaffordability portion of, say, 18% interest yet, but it's still significant. And as people start to or continue renewing their mortgages, we still have half the country that needs to renew mortgages in the next couple years at these higher rates. So as they renew, that's ultimately going to drive up this unaffordability index on the right. So how's the Canadian unemployment doing? If we're having some troubles within the, maybe the Canadian consumers feeling some weakness and feeling some pressure, ultimately, so unemployment, so the Canadian jobless rate on the right, we're around 5%, just over 5%. That is historically low. You can see long-term back to 1980, so we continue to see pretty strong job growth. So even though there's some challenges in the economy and we've had some problems, ultimately Canadians are still being hired. There's still high demand for for immigration and for new Canadians to come in and find work. So overall, the jobless rate has been trending kind of in a really tight labor market. For if you're a business or if you're a farm looking to hire labor, you probably have found that it can be challenging to find labor because labor has a lot of choices right now with few jobs out there. The other thing on unemployment is always looking at wage growth. So really wage growth helps to determine what the consumer expects to have next year as far as income. If we expect really strong wage growth over the next year, and as I said, the Canadian consumer spends what they earn, if you earn more money, you're going to spend it. And that just continues to drive inflation. So that's sort of the Bank of Canada's worry when they're looking at this data is getting wage growth back in check to make sure that inflation doesn't become cyclical and built in, because otherwise it's almost impossible to get inflation back to 2% from the Bank of Canada's perspective. So this is the wage growth right now in Q3 this year. It was 5%. So again, if the Canadian consumer is spending that money, it's pretty tricky to get. It's pretty tricky to return inflation to 2%. If we're all getting paid 5% more and we spend it, inflation really can't go back to 2%. So the Bank of Canada has seen, they are expecting future softness in wage growth, and this will return more to the historical 1 to 2% growth year over year. The other thing that's happened in Canada, so we're seeing higher, so we're not seeing a weakening job market. We're seeing the jobs being uptaken by new Canadians. So immigration was 3% in 2023. So that was just over 1 million people. So obviously that is a huge amount of people coming into Canada. It pushed our population over 40 million for the first time. So we're expecting continued strong immigration numbers for the next few years. That is a good thing. It helps businesses be able to hire. We are not in a place where it's not a bad thing to bring in more Canadians. There probably should be looking at like what is the correct number of immigration is always a discussion point to. Is 1 million people, where do they go for Ontario and for housing prices in Ontario? If half of those people sell in Ontario, it does mean you have quite a bit of population pressures in certain parts of Canada. So Ontario would be one of them, BC would be another. So you do have pressures on certain provinces for sure where the immigration settles. So then overall, the Canadian economy, we're talking about how the consumer is under a little bit of pressure. And here are two forecasts. The top bar is what the Bank of Canada is actually forecasting. So they're looking at, through the first 2 quarters in 2024, of 0.8% growth in the economy. So we are seeing 0% growth for Q1 and then 1% growth for Q2. So we have slightly weaker growth estimates than the Bank of Canada does at this point as an internal economics team. And that's partially the reasoning we've seen before, is that the Canadian consumer is, they are under pressure. They are having to renew mortgages at higher levels. They're having to spend more of their disposable income on just servicing their debt. And so we're expecting that to see a weaker economy because the Canadian consumer, which drives our economy, has been under pressure. One of the big watch items for producers in the room, like the Canadian dollar, is really important. The Canadian dollar makes a big difference when we're looking at both selling your products, which we sell on the global market, as well as input prices. So for input prices, you probably want to see a strong dollar because it means you can import for cheaper from other places of the world, which we get a lot of fertilizer, seed, equipment, for example. But when you're selling your products, whether it's grains, certain livestock or meat products, a weaker Canadian dollar actually impacts you and is beneficial. So it's sort of, there's trade-offs for a weaker or a stronger Canadian dollar. Overall, our research shows that a slightly weaker dollar is net a bit more beneficial for agriculture in Canada compared to a stronger dollar. So we're forecasting the dollar to be basically flat over 2024. The big risk in here is if the Bank of Canada continues to cut, if they do something different on cutting rates compared to the United States. The difference in interest rates between the two countries drives international money. International money wants to invest in places where the interest rate is higher. So if the United States leaves their interest rate higher for longer and ours gets cut, that will drive money into the United States and weaken our currency. So for us, the main watch item here is looking at what Canada does compared to the US Federal Reserve. And the US economy has shown stronger growth than Canada, which means that they may be forced to keep their interest rate higher for longer than Canada, and then that would drive down the Canadian dollar. So net, it's probably a slight positive for Canadian agriculture, but it really depends if you're in the ag production side or if you're in, say, ag business or even agri-food. It'll make a bit of a difference. So that is economic weakness. We are seeing it continuing into 2024, but on a good note as borrowers of money, that we're seeing inflation start to come down and that we expect the interest rates, so borrowing rates, will start to come down as well in 2024. And the timing of that is just depending on where you see certain, like how the economy goes throughout the first half of the year, if the Bank of Canada is able or it needs to start cutting rates sooner than we expect it to. So the second section today is going to be on commodity prices, inputs, and profitability. So from a grains and oilseed perspective, we're seeing grains and oilseeds moving in different directions. And we're also seeing that similarly on livestock, where we've seen some really strong cattle markets, and then we've had some challenges with hogs over the last year due to slaughter capacity. And in general, we've seen some quite different things occur, even though overall prices have been quite good. So the biggest thing to watch for in the next year is weather. Weather remains a watch item across Western Canada and the US. I would say it's also a big watch item right now in places like Brazil and Argentina. If you follow crop markets, you know that Brazil grows their soybeans and corn on the off season that we do. So right now they are planting corn and soybeans, and their weather there really will help drive prices in March, April, May, because that's when they're harvested and they come onto the global market. So right now we'd watch those areas for the upcoming crop. We know what the US and we know what the Canadian crop size is at this point, so it's not really it's not an unknown at this point. The other thing for then cattle, and cattle makes a big difference because Western Canada was so dry this year, so we had a herd reduction, even though pricing is really good in the beef side. So Western Canada, which grows a lot of cow-calf and feedlots, we've seen that dryness really impact those markets. The other thing is the southern United States. So Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas has also had dryness for multiple years, and that's also impacting the size of the cattle herd. And it's this overall North American story when it comes to cattle that's actually driving down the herd size and then driving up the price of beef. So just a few different charts. We have some people online. So we've got corn and soybeans would be more of the Ontario crops. So corn futures, same as wheat. There's really been softness this year. 2022, when Russia invaded the Ukraine or continued their invasion of the Ukraine, we saw a really strong pop up in both corn and wheat futures. So it ended up being for 2022, we had pretty high prices. But at this point, the market has really taken out any sort of war premium or concern that the market is not going to be able to access the grains out of Ukraine or Black Sea or through Russia as well. So the market is sort of ignoring that as a problem at this point. It's kind of come to terms with what it is and has taken that premium out. On the other side, when we look at oil seeds, we're actually seeing a lot more support in the markets. So support on both canola as well as soybeans. And it's kind of twofold. You've got China continuing to be a big buyer globally and continuing to buy more soybeans, which feeds their domestic livestock herd. So China is a big factor. The other factor on soybeans and canola is renewable fuels. So North America is really starting to move towards a product called renewable diesel. And that uses canola oil, it can use soybean oil, it can also use fats, tallows, livestock products rendering as well. But there's only so much of that product being produced, and it all has a home at this moment. So if you want to find additional vegetable oil or additional oils or products to use in new biodiesel capacity, you tend to have to go after soybean oil or canola oil in Canada. So with expected, with higher mandates for increasing the amount of renewable fuels, we can expect to see more years where there's kind of support for the oilseed complex, and that's really driven off the oil part of it versus the meal, which still is going into livestock, kind of being traded around the world, but it's really the oil part of those crops that's driving those markets. On the cattle side of things, kind of feeder cattle and fed cattle are both really strong. Kind of each of the last 4 years, we've seen the price just jump up each year. So this year, U.S. feeder cattle have been reaching record levels. Again, this is what comes back to dryness in both Western Canada as well as Oklahoma, Texas. So producers would have liked to have retained heifers and kept more cattle back, but there was just a lot of places where they ran out of rangeland, they ran out of pasture, there was limited amounts of hay, and it wasn't profitable to bring in feed from another area. So you've got producers in kind of those major growing regions that are reducing their herd size, and that's really putting pressure on both feeder and fed cattle futures, and then that works its way back into the cash market. For a place like Ontario, where we're at today, there's a lot of feeder cattle, like 500-pound calves that come from Western Canada, so it means that there's higher prices being paid for those calves, but it does mean that there's higher prices as well once they're fed in Ontario. So a place like Ontario is a bit more insulated perhaps than Western Canada when we look at these markets today. U.S. hog futures, hog prices again have been pretty strong over the last year, and I think it's interesting that we've had pretty strong prices, but when we look at margins, we've actually had pretty weak hog margins. And a lot of that is, even though the price from a futures perspective looks pretty good, the actual cash price for hogs is down. And the pressure on that is due to slaughter capacity in Canada. So I'm hoping in the new year, in 2024, we've sort of worked through some of the slaughter constraints that Canada has kind of had to fight through this year, and then maybe hogs can kind of go on an upward cycle. But it's definitely been some challenging days for the hog side. For supply managed prices, we just show index prices. You can see that broilers and eggs are both up through 2022, but they've been pretty flat for the year. Those prices haven't really gone up. The industry continues to have to deal with avian influenza, which kind of went away through the summer, but it has come back, especially in British Columbia. They've depopulated something like 2 million birds in the last month or 6 weeks. We've had a case in Quebec a few weeks ago in a commercial barn. So as bird migration happens in these areas, we're continuing to see pressure on avian influenza. But overall, I think the poultry sector has done a really good job in Canada of both maintaining supply and then making sure that there's enough both chicken meat and then eggs getting to retail. So I think that has done a really good job. On the milk side of things, you can see that milk is the bottom line, and we actually saw a dip in milk prices this summer. So even though milk is supply managed, there's still imported milk that comes in from the United States. So this summer we saw higher production in the United States, more than they essentially could consume. So their price went down, and that lower imported milk price worked its way into Canada, and that's why we saw milk drop a little bit in Ontario and in Canada as well. So we had some softness in the milk pricing. It has come back, and we expect it to be more flat looking into 2024. So the other component, if you have decent looking prices for the next year, is input costs. So we're looking at input costs here. We've got fertilizer on the top and fuel on the bottom. So fertilizer was 150% or 1.5 times higher than it was just in 2019. So if it was $500, it'd be $1,250 in 2022. So we saw both high prices for the commodities, but then obviously input costs were up significantly as well, which is not ideal. It has come down, and we expect it to really be flat into 2024. So that is, I would say, some positive, that it has at least returned more to, it's not back to 2019 levels, but neither are commodity prices as well. And you can bet fertilizer groups understand where those prices are, so they do a good job of making sure the price doesn't get too low. On the fuel side of things, fuel has been pretty volatile, and we expect it to be so. The big risk on fuel in Ontario and Eastern Canada this winter is there's a lot of diesel that's been being shipped to Europe. So in 2022, or at the start of this year, Europe cut off Russia from supplying them with diesel due to the invasion. Because of that, Europe had to look around the world to find diesel. An easy place is off the east coast of the United States. So in that case, that's New York Harbor. So New York Harbor has been loading out diesel and shipping it to Europe for a year now. So what that's done is drive down diesel stocks in eastern United States. By association, the market is kind of goes across the border, so that's also in eastern Canada. So we've seen lower diesel stocks, which is impacting the price of diesel and makes it more volatile. Until that market in Europe is kind of resupplied, and global trade patterns take time to adjust. So Russia obviously has excess amount of diesel that they're not able to ship to Europe, but maybe they're able to ship it elsewhere, and it just takes time for global trade flows to kind of reconfigure where that diesel has to move from, and then hopefully that increases stocks in North America and lets diesel prices kind of soften a bit. So I think it's more of it's a risk factor there where if Europe has a really cold winter, it's just something to watch for. So here are west and east crop margins. These are without land costs in them. So in the west, we see basically break even this year. That in a lot of parts of Western Canada that had really poor yields due to weather, there would be a crop insurance or an agri-stability payment on top of that. So there's probably some upside in the 2023 numbers for Western Canada. For 2023 in Eastern Canada on a corn-soybean rotation, we did see some weakness in margins. That's driven off lower commodity prices throughout the year, a lot of that being off corn coming down from $7.50 to $6 levels, and that's driving down the margin. The reason I didn't show land in here, and because I'll touch on land at the end, is that there's such a wide range of land prices and of what people actually are paying for land. There's producers maybe in the room who all the land is paid for. So then your land cost would be more of an opportunity cost you're looking at it. But if you're purchasing land today, then you'd have a very different margin. And that's why I don't show land in these charts, because each individual operation is going to be very unique as to where your profitability lies. So this is where beef, we're seeing really strong cow-calf prices. These are Alberta kind of origins, but Ontario, the same trend would be occurring. So we've seen a really strong jump in margins for the West. And for cow-calf, of course, this assumes that you're able to purchase or you've grown your own feed as well. So if you're in an area of Alberta where you've run out of pasture and then your margins are going to look quite different than this. But if you're fortunate enough to have had good weather and you're able to raise cow-calf, there's pretty strong margins in that field right now. On the feedlot side, again, an improvement year over year, and we really see it kind of flat into 2024 on the feedlot side. So looking at the hog side of things, 2023, as I mentioned, there were issues in the hog industry as far as accessing slaughter capacity. So when we look at 2023, there's going to be negative margins across most producers in Ontario. Manitoba or like the West would be close to break even for the year. So we're seeing 2023 was a challenging year for the hog sector. We do expect a return to profitability in 2024. The chart on the left just shows it by month, and you can see producers will continue losing money until about July, and then it turns positive, and then the higher margin throughout the summer will overall put the annual profitability slightly above zero. This is a demand index. So the solid line, so I'll use beef as an example. The solid line for beef is beef demand, while the dotted line is actual beef consumption. So because the beef demand is higher than beef consumption, it means that consumers are actually really demand beef, but they're eating less of it than they actually want. And this is a substitution effect. So in this case, it means that beef has gone up in price so much that it's actually priced itself out of some people's budgets. So even though you go to the store and you're saying, I'm going to eat beef, you look at the price and say, no, I'm going to buy pork because it's half the price. And that's why pork here is the actual opposite, where the gray lines, the actual pork consumption is above what the expected demand is. So these charts are just a way to show what consumer preferences are based at the current price where we're at today. So right now, consumers prefer beef, but they're buying pork because of the price difference. So that's commodity prices, input, and profitability, a quick run through. Again, these are like big picture, like entire region type average values. If you have questions on these after, come up and we can chat about your operation, what you're seeing. But again, they're not meant to represent your exact farm, but they're meant to represent, well, what's going on in the industry? How does things look in general? Am I above or below that line? And why is that the case? So, yeah. So the question was, are beef herds going to grow again? And it's a big, economics answer. It depends. So as long as Western Canada can go back to getting decent moisture in 2024, the United States continues to kind of reduce their drought amount, we will see the beef herd slowly rebuild. The big thing with beef is that it just takes so long. It takes 2 or 3 years to actually retain enough heifers and grow your herd to see it grow. Hogs, you're in a year where you're able to rebuild a hog herd. So I think it's really weather dependent at this point, because pricing is saying that producers should retain some heifers, they should retain some cows versus culling them, and it's just, do you have access to feed? That's the big question going forward. So then the final section is looking at farmland values. So this is 2022 Canadian farmland values. So this was December 31st, 2022. So in Ontario, where we're at today, there was 19.4% land value growth in 2022. These charts are available. There's a FCC value. If you go just search FCC land value, you'll find the report for this. It has regional breakdowns as well. So you'll be able to actually go into Ontario, or if you're in Saskatchewan, or if you're in Alberta, you can go in and look at your specific region and see what land is valued there, and then just compare it to what you think it is locally. There's going to be some slight differences. With these values, they toss out the top 5% of sales by value and the bottom 5%. So it gets rid of the absolute highest level as well as the lowest one to try to provide a representative price on farmland. So overall, Canada was up just under 13% in 2022, which makes sense. We were seeing strong farm cash receipts at that time and strong farmland. There were reasons to be purchasing farmland with how margins looked at that point. This year, we've seen obviously interest rates continue to put pressure on debt and on margins. So this is the mid-year update. So on the left is January to June, so just in 6 months, we've seen Ontario land values go up by 6.9%. So the growth rate is slowing for Ontario, but it's still positive. For Canada, it was 7.7%, and we're expecting it to be more around that 11 or 12% for 2023. So that growth, there's still growth. It's important that even with higher interest rates, even with lower margins, we're still seeing strong demand for farmland, and it's important to really pay attention that land values continue to increase across the country, but it is really regional when you look at both within a province as well as within the country. So this is just showing Ontario's value. You can just see the range in farmland from Northern Ontario of $4,400 an acre to kind of the southwest, where it's more like $29,000 an acre. So there's quite a wide range within both Ontario as well as across Canada. So today we chat about economic weakness, that it's going to continue in 2024, that inflation and borrowing, we do think it's likely peaked, which it's going to come down. That's going to provide some relief for consumers as well as for producers in the room. Commodity prices, they're not at historical levels anymore, but they're still strong historically. So there's still some positive signs on the commodity markets. Inputs have come down. And then when we look at farmland values, we're seeing lower listings supporting farmland values. So in 2023, we've just seen fewer farms come up for sale, and I think that's helping support some of the appreciation in farmland values, but there is still that occurring. Yep. So it's a good question. What are the land values based on? That is farmland. So that would not include a house on that land. So, and just if you go to fcc.ca/newsletter, that's where we have our information. So most things that I've shared today, we're putting out information like that weekly to share that knowledge that we're here to serve both customers as well as the general industry and share knowledge. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Justin. Can we give him another round of applause? So we are going to end this afternoon talking about one of the hottest topics that many of you in the room are dealing with, and that's farm transition. And whether you are just starting your journey into the transition planning or you are closing one chapter and moving on to the next, we can all use some tips and advice and shared stories from farmers and other producers of this vital piece of business information of planning. So, FCC Business Advisor Audrey Morin is going to join me on the stage and introduce our final speaker of the day. Audrey?
Hello, everyone. As Katelyn mentioned, I am a business advisor at Farm Credit Canada. I am one of the 12 business advisors across the country, and we are here to help farm families navigate the beginning phases of farm succession. Our national team of business advisors is here to listen and ask the important question. We help farm families establish realistic timelines, identify goals, help them address the barriers, and most importantly, boost confidence so families can take some action, big or small, towards their transition journey. If you wish to speak to a business advisor, you can reach out to your local FCC office, or you can also reach out to your relationship manager or on our website. I am pleased to introduce our final speaker of the day, Geena Luckett. She is the owner and general manager of Nova Scotia Luckett Vineyards, navigating and carving her way through a business and industry where her father was a vibrant trailblazer was no easy feat, but leveraging her outside experience, questioning the process, and introducing new thinking into her business has allowed her to establish herself as a female leader in a male-dominated viticulture industry. Let's welcome Geena to the stage.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to be here. First off, has anyone been to Nova Scotia before? A few. Love it. Has anyone been to Luckett Vineyards before? Well, here's an opportunity. Open door for everyone. So I'm really excited to be here talking to you today. And first, I just want to get started to tell you a little bit about our business. So, growing up, we lived just outside of Halifax, Nova Scotia. My dad owned some grocery stores at the time called Pete's Boutique. They were specialty grocery stores, but he's really been a green grocer and a farmer all of his life. So in 1999, my parents were looking at relocating into the country. And aside from ruining mine and my sister's lives by making us move, the intention was with this farm was to start growing different fruits and vegetables to supply his then grocery stores. So he was growing everything from peaches, plums, pears, artichokes, onions, potatoes, kind of you name something that can grow in Nova Scotia, he was growing it. A few years into the farm ownership, he met a local vineyard owner. His name was Hans-Peter Stutz. He was the founder of one of the oldest wineries in Nova Scotia, and he convinced my dad to plant a few rows of a red varietal at the time. Leon Milot was the grape variety. And next thing you know, we are ripping out all the fruits and vegetables and we are planting grapes because my dad is a man who bigger is better, and he figured, why should I just be growing these grapes and selling them to someone else when I could be growing these grapes, processing them, making wine, and having a whole experience. So fast forward to 2010, and our first vintage was made, and we resurrected the first iteration of what the winery building was. The following year, we opened to the public and started off with a modest 3,000 case annual production. We had about 15 acres under vine at that time. We employed about 30 people in the peak season, to today, where we are producing about 16,000 cases. We do sell across Canada, not in Ontario, unfortunately. But we employ about 90 people, welcome over 250,000 guests to the winery each year and have a full, as you can see from the pictures here, we've got a full wine shop, tourism experience, restaurant, and we do produce and manufacture all of our wine with 100% Nova Scotia grapes. There we go. So how did I end up here? I'm one of 6 children. My dad was married previous to marrying my mom, so I have 3 half-sisters and a half-brother, and I also have a younger sister. A few of them have kind of dabbled in the family business. Ultimately, I'm the only one still standing. And truthfully, growing up, I never had really seen my future as being involved with the farm. Now, I am still a horse girl, so I did expect to see a career in the agriculture sector, but I didn't expect to see it in any type of production or farming or agritourism component. It wasn't until a little series of events that have led me here. So naturally, growing up in the country, I wanted to get back to the big city. And what says big city like Halifax, Nova Scotia? So I went to Dalhousie University, did my Bachelor of Management there. And while I was attending Dal, I was actually working at my dad's then grocery stores, doing everything from working the juice bar, slinging cheese, grabbing the carts, answering the phones, kind of whatever needed to be done. There was 2 things that I very quickly realized when I was working in that business. One was that I had negative interest in the grocery world. And 2 was that I realized that working in my family business meant that I had to work twice as hard as everyone else. So I'm sure you can imagine my excitement when I was working at the store and I actually met the owner of a local tack shop, Road Apple's Pet and Equestrian Essential. And she offered me a job. And I could not quit the grocery stores quick enough. Luckily, not only was I now working in an industry that I thought was going to be my career, I also gained a lot of really valuable experience during that time because I've gone from working in a family business to now working for a family business. The pet and equestrian shop was owned by a husband and wife duo, so I was able to really see that from an outside perspective, something that I hadn't had before. During my time at Road Apples was when the winery was really getting started, and that had started happening when I was at university. So I was pretty removed from the whole experience. I wasn't really seeing what was going on in the day-to-day on the farm. I didn't really understand where the wine industry was at that point. And in 2011, when I mentioned that we opened the winery, I was still at the tack shop, but I was on my days off, I started working at the winery just to help out. I was at the farmer's market. I was doing some kind of low-level, entry-level jobs of whatever needed to be done. And I quickly realized why my dad was so excited and so passionate about this. Being in the winery world and in that space, we are farmers, we are packagers, we are marketers, we are storytellers, we are hospitality specialists, restaurateurs. The multifaceted kind of area of this business was so exciting because it meant that I was going to be doing something different every day. So in 2012, the events manager that was currently at Luckett Vineyards was relocating out of province. And like maybe most family businesses do, I'm not really sure, but my dad made me send in a resume and apply for the job just like everyone else. I had to go in and be interviewed, pitch myself, and I am happy to report that after many negotiations, I was hired. I was the successful candidate, but it wasn't without a lot of pitching. In the first couple of years of my experience in the business was just really learning what it takes. This was a whole new world to me. I didn't come from restaurant or hospitality or any type of agriculture world outside of the horse world. So I really wanted to learn my way around the business. So after the first couple of years, I spent a harvest with our winemaker. For any of you who maybe don't know, it turns out winemaking is like 99% cleaning, so it was not nearly as glamorous as I expected it to be, but it was still great to learn. I took a role of our wine shop and tasting bar manager and restaurant manager role that year as well. We're a seasonal business, so we're closed in the winters, and I had the opportunity to head overseas and gain some different experience at a winery in New Zealand. And then in 2016, between my dad and I just having these open conversations and including the rest of the department heads, we really identified that there was a gap in our leadership. The winery had been growing. My dad was taking on many other things, and we really saw this opportunity to bring in or hire within, luckily for me, a general manager. So after, again, pitching myself and really, engaging in conversation with my dad about, I've put in this time, I've been making an effort to learn all the different areas of the business, I was promoted to the general manager role. And then in 2018, started the transition to a co-owner position that I'm in right now. So I'm always shocked by how many people my dad knows or who have crossed paths with him in his life. So if you know, you know. And if you don't know, I hope this gives you a little bit of a glimpse into what I consider to be these impossible shoes to fill. The general manager role was a new role to our company. It was one that we didn't really have any set standards or kind of job roles set for at that time. So I was just trying to work and understand from him, what did he want me to do? Where did he want this role to go? And for me, a big component of this was realizing, and it's still a work in progress, and accepting this, that I don't have to be him to be successful. My beginning stages of the general manager position and this leadership role was rough. It was, there was a lot of confusion that we were creating for our team, a lot of frustration, I would say, within the team, because there was this unknown, this uncertainty. People were saying, well, do we go to Pete? Do we go to Geena? Who's responsible for what? People were a little bit on edge. I also was experienced some self-inflicted major imposter syndrome. All of my experience in this world came from this job. I didn't grow up in a restaurant scene. I didn't have all the qualifications that other people had. I didn't go to school for winemaking or viticulture. I wasn't a sommelier. So what did I bring to the table? And why was I deserving of this leadership role? And one of the key things that my dad has always said to me, and is a value within our company now, is that if you have the willingness to dig in and do what needs to be done, an open mind, and the adaptability to pivot and change, a lot of times that those are going to far exceed whatever qualifications that I had felt that I needed. So I'm in this general manager position now. I'm trying to navigate this role since it's new for our company, it's new for my dad, for our team. And what means success to me in my role is my team having confidence in me. So I really needed to establish myself within the company. Doing things like implementing new procedures and policies was a start. Formalizing things that I felt that perhaps we were a little bit weak in previously also helped to give confidence in my team. Having open door communication between all levels of our business. Just letting my team and organization know that I am the person that they can come to now. They don't need to go to my dad. They can if they want, but that I am available to them. So I'm establishing myself within the company. Now the next step for me in feeling confidence in myself was establishing myself within the industry. I was doing everything I could to get my name out there. I was volunteering at events. I was attending all of the different tastings that were offered. I was joining boards, volunteering at community events. Whatever I could do to get myself out there, establish myself within the community, but also meet those connections and try and align myself with people who are in similar positions to me who I can really learn from. I'm establishing myself in the business, I'm establishing myself in the community and the industry, and now I've got some boundaries that I've got to set or attempt to set. So the saying, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, that was not a saying that couldn't be used to describe my dad. Because really, why should anything change for him just because my role has changed? He always had this saying for me, and he always goes, "You're empowered. You're empowered to make the decision. You're empowered to do whatever you need to do." And I would always joke, I'm empowered until I'm not, because it's when I make the wrong decision that I then have to have my answer as to why I did what I did or why I chose to do what I did. And I don't have a prescription for you, and this is going to look different for everyone, but I would highly recommend that the relationship between junior and the senior generations, if you can set some boundaries on both levels, and maybe that's how you communicate or when you communicate. But having those parameters and being able to reference those, for me, has made the experience and the conversations and the ability to collaborate a much healthier one. Now I have what I consider my 3 C's for dealing with dad. And these 3 C's for dealing with dad I use both in the business as well as in our everyday relationship. And I use this with our whole team and encourage our whole team to go back to the basics with this as well. So communication, talk it through. Don't assume, and have an open mind. Collaboration. Are you working together with somebody on this project? Is it my dad as another leader? Is it our teams? If we're not working together, should we be working together? Or is this a solo initiative or approach? And compromise. This is honestly probably the one that I utilize the most, because for any of you who are involved in family business, I would say that like 70% of what we do is taking into consideration some form of compromise. Knowing when to give, when to take, when to stand up and really stand your ground on something, or just let it go. So we have our 3 C's for dealing with dad, or our 3 C's for approaching any type of communication. Now we're talking about transition talk prep. So I'm the general manager. I've been in this role for a couple of years. I'm starting to think that, yeah, I see a career, I see a future in this business. What does my future look like? What is my 5, my 10, my 15 years? For us, it was maybe a little unconventional. Our transition discussion was super gradual. And at the beginning, it was more, I was just feeling things out. I wanted my dad to know what my intent was, that I had the intention of staying in the business, and I wanted to know what that looked like for him and how we would navigate this in the future. And what that allowed me to do was that I started to create a little bit of a list. In hindsight, it was probably a little bit of like ammunition for when we would have any type of argument, but for the purpose of this talk, we're gonna say that it's a list. So what I started to do was this self-audit every few months, and I'm looking and I'm saying, what do I bring to the business? How has my role changed? How will my role change? Have I gone above and beyond? Where am I weak? Where do things need to change? This list helped me see where I was either improving or where I needed to improve, but it also helped me develop what my non-negotiables were going to be for my dad's succession plan and our transition progress. Having this kind of list prepared and available to me to check in at all the times and edit as I needed to made me feel so much more confident in my non-negotiables. And in conversations that I've had with colleagues in the past, I hear this a lot, that the junior generation is often so worried about coming off as entitled or spoiled, or like you're just expecting your parents to hand over the keys or the leader to hand over the keys to you. But it's important that we have our non-negotiables too, and whatever that transition plan looks like, it needs to work for both parties. The next thing that I often get asked is, well, when do I bring that conversation up? What's the right time to talk about transition? And I think that looks different for everyone. I don't have something that I can prescribe to you to say, this is the conversation you should have, and this is when you should have it, and this is what you should say. As mentioned, ours was a very gradual conversation. And although it was maybe a little bit less traditional, I can assure you that it was no less awkward. I know those conversations are hard to have, but again, by having that preparation done, it can make you feel more confident and more prepared for when these types of conversations come up. For us, when we started, we did things a little backwards, and I'm going to talk about this a little further on, but we actually started the transition plan before my dad even had a succession plan. So I'll get to that later. But things for us were a little bit expedited. So I mentioned in 2018 was when our transition process started. So we had an agreement that I was going to start acquiring a percentage of the business over time as I worked in it. Fast forward to 2020, and my dad was on one of these crazy adventures that he goes on. He was visiting the Azores, a group of islands owned by Portugal, San Miguel to be exact, and he fell in love with the landscape, and inside of a week, he had found a property, put a bid on it, got it, and started a new business. So all of a sudden, our transition plan that I thought we were going to be working alongside each other until he died, because he doesn't believe in retirement, was out the window. So things were changing. This was going to be, all of a sudden, he was essentially exiting the business, and we had to totally revamp what our plan looked like and what his succession plan was going to look like. And would I ever feel ready? I know this was maybe a little bit sooner than I expected, but truthfully, no. I think that type of uncertainty and unknown and nervousness would probably have happened at any point in time. Would it maybe have been better if it wasn't right before COVID and all the other things? Probably, but it would be nice to have a crystal ball. So as mentioned, the succession. Any Succession show fans in here? Oh, it's a good show. You gotta watch it. And when you do watch it, just know that we are slightly less dysfunctional than they are, but only slightly. Anyway, you should all watch it. So the succession plan, as I mentioned, we kind of did things backwards. We had started on this transition without even knowing what the succession plan end goal was. We kind of had an idea. I knew that essentially, for me, one of my non-negotiables was that if I'm going to eventually take over this business and run this business, I'm doing it alone. And I'm not doing it with any other family. And that is, I know that sounds really cutthroat, and I've got lots of other siblings, but that was just something that I wasn't interested in. I love them, but I don't necessarily know that I want to work with them. So doing this backwards, and all the advisors in the room are probably cringing at me right now, so I'm sorry, but what doing this kind of backwards did for us was it enabled me to be super involved in my dad's succession planning, which was huge. I was getting to attend these meetings with the accountants and the lawyers to ask the questions and see what this meant and what it looked like. That gave me a total understanding of, well, are my non-negotiables going to fit in here? How is this plan going to work for me or not work for me? And it enabled me to be a part of this process and help make the decisions that ultimately would lead back to our transition plan to ensure that this is going to work for both of us and it's going to be sustainable. So we started the transition process. The next key piece in my experience was that we had to shift the mindset. We've gone from father-daughter to employer-employee to now we're partners. So part of this shift in mindset meant that we're going to change how we view each other. We're going to change how we portray each other to others. We're going to probably change the way that we communicate. And again, this has been an ongoing effort because this shift in mindset didn't happen overnight. And it's something we are still working on. But I think if you can try and approach the interactions that you have with those involved in your transition plan with this shift in mindset and trying to take it to a more professional level and remove that family component, it will make things much easier in terms of your communication for the future. Next, it was really important for me, again, wanting to make sure that the team remained confident in me as a leader, that we needed to include them in the conversations and ensure that they were aware of what was happening. Sharing the news was one thing, encouraging questions, making sure that there was open communication, and not that you have to share every little detail. I'm not talking about inviting your team into your meetings with your lawyers or your accountants or anything of that. This is high level that we're talking about. But the minute there's any questions or uncertainty with a team, I was identifying that is where I was starting to hear rumors and gossip and people being concerned. They don't know about what's happening with the future. The news of Edonia, my dad's new business, that was no secret. So I didn't want, those within even our industry or our organization to go, oh, did you hear that Pete bought a new business? What's happening? Is he going to sell this? Are we going to have jobs? Are we still involved? What's going on? Getting ahead of that, those types of pieces of information was super important. And also that helped to maintain our team buy-in. So I've gone from a leadership role to now an ownership role in the business. So although the team is still seeing me as that day-to-day leader, it's now I'm the future of the business. So I want to make sure that they're feeling good about where things are at and that they're involved. Providing a space or forum for them to share their concerns or provide their feedback was really helpful in our situation. Inviting their ideas, their suggestions within reason, and communicating progress, change, successes, challenges, helped keep the team feeling like they're part of the family. They're invested in this process. They want to see the business succeed. They want to see the business succeed with me as a partner. And leading by example. This is huge. And again, it's such a simple concept, but that going back to that concept that my dad has always really instilled in me, that just willing to dig in and dive in and do whatever needs to be done. We've said in our company, nobody is above anything. I don't care if you work in the tasting bar, if you're in the cellar, or if you're in the kitchen. If somebody needs help, we all help each other out. So leading by example has been huge in terms of maintaining that confidence and maintaining our team buy-in. Next, I wanted to really ensure that I was maybe, changing isn't the right word. I should have had that actually as challenging. Challenging, nurturing, and creating alignment. So my father ran the company, he founded it, he obviously established partnerships, agreements with suppliers, different stars within the company, who he developed, who he promoted. And that's all great, and I didn't want to come in and erase any of that. But what I did want to do was evaluate all of those different partnerships and collaborations. Do they align with me and my values and my leadership styles? Because if they don't, that's something that I want to work towards. Can those be changed so that they do? Should I look at different options? Am I surrounding myself with like-minded people? Am I collaborating with businesses that complement what we're doing? The times are changing. My dad is of a different age demographic. Things have changed even just in the 10 years that we've been operating in the business. So evaluating all of those partnerships and those collaborations was really important for me at the beginning, and not making drastic changes, but just auditing them and seeing where do things need to change and what does a timeline look for that. Or maybe they don't need to change. Maybe I just need to nurture that relationship because now I'm the one who's going to be interacting and dealing with these people. Empowering community. So we're trying to align ourselves with businesses that make sense, with suppliers, with different individuals and businesses within the community and the organization. And now we've got this community. What I know for certain is that I'm not the first person, I'm not the last person, and I'm not the only person to be feeling what I'm feeling or going through the challenges that I'm experiencing. So what I can say is leaning into the community was huge for me. I talked about getting myself out there, establishing myself within the community. So now I've made these resources. I don't have to be part of a super formal learning group that maybe is expensive and not attainable to everyone and a lot of time commitment. Maybe I'm just going to the pub for a beer with the winemaker down the road. Or a perfect example is our industry hosts these, during the summer seasons, they're called TNT, Tuesday Night Tastings. It's once a month where we invite everyone from the industry, winemakers, front of house, back of house, vineyard managers, tour operators, and we all get together, we taste each other's wine, we talk about what's happening in the industry, we troubleshoot challenges that we might all be facing, come up with new ideas, plan events. The amount of learning that I have taken away from those experiences, just asking the questions. I sit on the Wine Growers Nova Scotia board, and it's a small board of 7 people. 4 of those 7 individuals on that board are all female second-gen wine operators. Do you know the amount of questions, troubleshooting, suggestions, asking for feedback that I have been able to learn from them? A lot of ranting. That's the other thing. Like, you want to rant and talk to people who understand you. Lean into your community. You can do that too. So we now are in our transition. We're trying to navigate this relationship between my dad and I, and maybe some of the power struggles and what things look like in a very new to us relationship and a new to us situation within the business. One of the things that I found was a big challenge at the beginning of this process was old versus new, and how it became a competition, and how if I referenced anything as old, my dad took it in a negative way, thinking that I was saying that it was lesser. If I referenced something new, I was taking it as a negative kind of perception that he's saying that my idea or suggestion is untested. Old and new, it's not a competition. They are different. There are valuable pieces of information and takeaways from both my new learnings and new ideas and suggestions, and his tried and true policies and procedures as well. So part of that shifting of the mindset included trying to remove these perceived negative feelings around comparing old versus new. And part of that was also, how can we blend the two together then? We know that to blend original or old and new approaches, values, procedures, anything from styles of wine to training techniques, helps to grow and modernize the vision and maintain that staff buy-in. So something that we implemented, and again, very simple, you don't need any experience to do this, you could sit down and do it today, is we would do these self-audits again. So whether it's being just between my dad and I, whether we're bringing in the department heads, we're sitting down and we're making a list of whether, again, it could be menu items, it might be what our values are, what our vision is. We're asking, how could these be better? Can they be modernized? What's broken? What's missing? And bringing the best of both of our experiences together and incorporating our team in that means that we can challenge these different ideas or ways that we've been doing. So it doesn't have to be how it used to be, which was referenced earlier. It doesn't have to be a total shift to completely changing to something brand new. Let's bring the best of both worlds together and combine these efforts to create something that's best suited for where the company is and what reflects both of our styles together. So I've given you a little snippet of our business, how I came to be in the situation that I'm in, and I'm going to share with you pretty much the only thing that I remember from my post-secondary education experience, and it's what I consider to be a leveled up pros and cons list. And it's a SWOT analysis, because we all get really excited about that, I think. And anyone in the audience who uses SWOT analysis or have learned of these in the past, you will know that this is a very weird way to use a SWOT analysis, but it's how I make a lot of decisions in my life. So I'm just going to grab my little notes here. So we're going to start with the strengths. So how I'm looking at the SWOT analysis is where I'm at in the transition process. So first, I feel fully supported by my dad, which is a huge strength. I bring a female perspective not only to our company, but to the industry, which I think has been lacking for a long time. I am more adaptable to technology, external policies, and social changes. I have an incredibly strong relationship with all levels on my team, and I am well established within the business and the industry. Some weaknesses. I am like ultimate type A. I like rules, I like structures, I like things to be black and white, and my dad is like Mr. Go with the flow, lots of gray area. That has brought so many challenges to us, and I see it as a big weakness, one I'm trying to work on. Acting like partners. This is still something we struggle with. We talk about it weekly. It has been one of the most daunting pieces of this progress is trying to remove that father-daughter component. Inconsistent communication and structure in our relationship. So as I mentioned, my dad has this new exciting business overseas. There's obviously a time difference. We're not communicating as consistently as we were when he was in the business. Our relationship structure has changed. I don't see him as often. It's just different. It's been a weakness for sure. And our informal arrangement. Although we do have a loose transition plan, and he does have a succession plan, I have felt that it's been more informal and, as mentioned, a little bit less conventional than what I grew up knowing about succession and transition plans. Opportunities. So for me, the continuing learning opportunities that I have as my dad as a mentor, he is incredible. His expertise, his experiences, his successes. To have access to that is huge. Also, with his new business in Adonia, that brings a whole nother level of opportunities and learnings from that business. I can leverage his connection and relationships. This was something that I struggled with at the beginning because I had a bit of a chip on my shoulder, we'll say, and I really wanted to just make my own way and have my own connections and be my own woman. But he has some really great connections and some really great resources and relationships that he's built over the years, and that's something that I need to leverage. And more of a focus on identifying the key players in the team. So because I've taken on some of this partnership role, it's alleviated both sides of things for us a little bit. So we're able to really identify those people within the organization or what we might be missing within the organization and spend the time developing them. Threats. Can't have a SWOT without a threat section. So I mentioned Adonia, the new business, as an opportunity. I also see this as a threat. The more that that business grows and that my dad is involved with that, he's a very hands-on owner, so he's going to be involved, means the less time that he has for Luckett Vineyards and the less time that I have to access him as a mentor. Other siblings and family. Again, don't want to sound cutthroat here, love my fam, but I do see the desire or entrance of other siblings or family coming into our business as a bit of a threat to our transition plan, only because it's changing the dynamic, would likely change the succession plan, and it doesn't align with my non-negotiables. Future travel restrictions. This is just one that was really prevalent in the last couple of years, obviously because of the COVID pandemic, and again, going back to that inconsistent communication. That's a threat. If he can't get back to Nova Scotia to come into the business, I see that as a threat. And this kind of ties in with one of our opportunities as well, and it's not really a threat because I can control it, but I'm going to say it anyway. My growing desire to create something of my own. I have been super transparent with my dad right from the beginning that I want to have something of my own. I love the winery. I'm super passionate about that, and I want to grow it, and that's my career and my life, but I also want to have something on the side that I started from the ground up. So, is this really my 15 seconds? Is that for me? Okay. I have a little longer than 15 seconds, but not much. What I want to finish off on is that shoulda, coulda, still can. That's what I tell myself all the time. because it's not too late to start. Transition planning and succession plans, it's not a be-all, end-all in the end, and that's set in stone. For me, treating this like an ongoing process has been huge. I want to make sure that things are staying in the lane and moving at a rate at which is sustainable for me, and that I also have the ability to change and adapt things as needed. With my dad as well. Adonia was the perfect example. We had to pivot, we had to change. His succession plan and our transition plan was going to be completely different. So take the time to just, even if you're already in the middle of your transition plan, it's not too late. Go on, make that list. What do you bring to the business? How do you want to see things change? What do you want to look and feel like in that business in 5 and 10 years? Just because you're in it already doesn't mean that it's too late and that the ending can't be changed. So just take that time to do the self-auditing. See how you feel about things. It's not too late. Just maintain those semi-regular check-ins. So that was a little bit of my story, and that came off of 2 really hard presentations there. I know I don't have any super sweet, awesome financial insights and really valuable information like that, but this is my story, and I hope that some of you can resonate to what I said. If you work in a family business or work for a family business or know somebody, maybe you can take something away from what I've told you today. And I do have my contact on there. If anyone feels like coming to Luckett Vineyards, hit me up. If you think of a question afterwards, hit me up. But I think we do have time for some questions as well, if there are any. So thank you guys very much for your time.
Thank you. That was amazing. Okay, so we do have time for questions. You are correct. And I get to be selfish and ask my question first. I ask if you are in the room and would like to ask a question, there are microphones on that podium, and our lovely assistant, Stacy, also has a microphone, so make sure you ask in there. And if you're watching online, just put it in the Q&A, and we will get that asked. But my first question for you is, one of the things that you had mentioned was, you talked about your non-negotiables. Can you give us an example of 1 or 2 of what your non-negotiables were?
No, I mean, the first one was that where I was at that time in the business when we started talking about transition, there was no other family involved. And I knew that if there was family involved prior to that, I obviously would have loved to nurture that and continue that. But where there wasn't any family involved at the time, one of my non-negotiables was that if I'm going to be the one running the business, I'm going to be doing it on my own. Right. So that was one of my non-negotiables. Another one of my non-negotiables was that he's not, this is going to sound so ridiculous, he's not allowed to come behind me and change things that I've just done. So that was one of our boundaries, and that would often happen, that I would tell the staff to do one thing, and then I'd see something done differently later in the day, and they're like, oh, Pete told me to. So I said, if you're not going to be here all the time, we're not going to be, you're empowering me, then you have to actually follow through with my decisions. And if you need me to explain on why I did something the way that I did, happy to do that. Right. But that was maybe a little sillier, non-negotiable, but was one that was really important to me.
And it's completely understandable, and it leads me to one of the questions that we got asked online, and that was about staffing in your team. You talk a lot about your team and the success of your company with your team. So first part of the question is, how big is the team of the Vineyard staff? And second part of that is, what are some of the greatest challenges / learning curves that you've faced in managing people?
Oh my God, how much time do you have?
Well,
we've got about 90 people peak season. 90 to 100. Full-time is much lower than that, about 10 people full-time. Biggest challenge, there's definitely a shift in mindset that's been happening, I've noticed, with the younger generation coming into the workforce. I would say that the focus has changed on what meaningful work maybe looks like for them comparative to what it did even 10 years ago. And I think COVID really also enhanced that. Everyone kind of had this experience of working from home and how awesome that is, and this kind of new level of flexibility. And unfortunately, that just, I know for a lot of you in the building, that type of maybe flexibility and type of work just doesn't really exist in agriculture, or not yet, and not in especially in hospitality. So I think just really trying to find like-minded people who really understand the business and understand what we're trying to achieve has been challenging, especially in a rural location. Being rural and being seasonal is tough, you know, trying to maintain staff year over year and not have to spend a fortune in training is really challenging. But we're fortunate that we do live in a university town, so we do have access to lots of young, great people looking to work. But it's, yeah, there's a lot of challenges.
For sure. Is there any questions from the audience that anyone who want to be brave enough to ask? We have one right here. And Audrey's up here as well. If you have any FCC specific transition planning questions, she's happy to answer those too. Hi.
So you seem to have a really good relationship with your dad. Would you have an example that you would be willing to share about a time you had conflict and when you successfully resolved it and how you did that?
That is a great question. I mean, yeah, we have conflict all the time, but how I guess, yeah, there's been lots of examples of times that we've argued or had some kind of blow-ups. I think for me, trying to remind him and myself in that moment of kind of going back to those basics. Why did this conflict start? Can we collaborate on a solution, and how are we communicating with it? I think one of the things that is a really amazing skill that my dad has, but also has been a challenge in our relationship, is he's always about just putting out fires. That's what he always says. I don't have time to explain to you why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm just putting out the fire. And I have to explain that as part of my learning process, and so that I can understand where he's coming from, I need to know why he made the decision that he did. So a lot of times it'll kind of, I just zip my mouth in the moment and let it go. And then at the end of the day, I'll have a conversation to say that we have to be a little more collaborative and communicative when we're dealing with the team, and especially to just bring that level of professionalism, and again, to ensure that we're not creating the confusion or having those team members feel like they're on edge because they're unsure of how to approach things. So I think we do a lot of talking it through. And I ask a lot of questions. There's a lot of why that still happens in our business. Why do you do this? Why did you do this? How did you come to that decision? So it's still a bit of a learning process. But yeah, I don't have any specific prescription again for dealing with that. But for us, the big piece has just been communication. And for me, it's let's work on this together. Don't just make a decision without me.
I think we have another one from online. Go ahead, Stacy.
So Rita asks, you talked about your wish to create your own something on the side from scratch. Do you also have a succession plan if you get to start the side business, especially given that one of your non-negotiables is having other family?
No, I don't have a succession plan in place for that currently. That's something that we are working on. I don't have children, and currently there's nobody in the company who has kind of made their intent known that they would be interested in taking on that. So the short answer is no, but it's definitely something that I know I need to work on.
And that's what succession planning is, right? It is working on a plan, and it doesn't have to be 100% quite yet, right? It is working through and having the communication and finding somebody who is the suitable successor, whether that's family or not, right?
For sure.
Is there anybody else that wants to ask a question before we wrap up? Thank you so much. Geena, it's been a pleasure getting to know you and your business, and thank you for sharing your story with us. It's powerful. Hearing transition plan stories is something that we need to share ourselves and learn from. So thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
don't know about you, but I have had such an incredible day of learning. Have you had an incredible day of learning? Yes. It has been wonderful to connect with so many of you in person and online. Thank you so much for joining us. For those in the room, don't go too far, because remember, I told you about the tailgate party. That is about to start. And unfortunately, for those of you joining us online, we're not going to tailgate with you, but you'll be here in spirit with us. So thank you so much. There is snacks available as well as a cash bar. For those online, be sure to check out fcc.ca/events to see if there is a Young Farmer Summit coming near you, because we are going on tour. We're getting the band back together and we're going on tour. So there will be an evaluation form that is sent to you online, and for the folks here, it is on your table. So please fill out that evaluation form. That lets FCC know if this programming is what you want from them and what you need from them. And they read every single one of them, so you can leave your completed form on the table for them. And for those who are joining online, everything will be emailed to you, as well as a recording of this presentation is going to be emailed to everyone who's been in attendance today. So I just want to say thank you again so much for letting me host you today. It's been super fun to get to know you, and please stick around. Thank you again.